All right. Mr. Bitner, were you in the room earlier when I went through the penalties for perjury?
No, I wasn't.
All right. So I'm required by law to advise you on those. Perjury is a Class C felony punishable by a maximum fine of $10,000, a maximum 5 years imprisonment, or both. Do you understand what perjury is?
I do.
And being advised of the potential penalties for perjury, do you promise to tell the truth in this case today?
I do.
All right. And can you state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
My name is Brian Bitner, B-I-T-N-E-R.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bakke.
Thank you. And then just one other housekeeping matter in terms of Exhibit 190. That's the advisory petition of citizens of Burleigh County directed to the commissioners of the PSC, Senator Hoven, Senator Kramer, U.S. Representative Kelly Armstrong, and others, including local legislators, and also addressed to the governor. I wanted to note for the record that there's 1,634 signed petitions by residents of Burleigh County who oppose the CO2 pipeline within 20 miles of the city of Bismarck, and also requesting financial indemnification, certain requirements on pipeline operators, and a rapid response plan utilizing first responders, and the other bullet points identified on that.
And that's the packet of petitions that you passed
That's
out
correct.
this morning.
And there were some that came in late that are not enclosed in the plastic that were on top of that.
Oh, okay.
And they're the ones that had the W190 on it.
Okay. All right.
They're the same advisory petitions as in the plastic packet, except for they were loose.
Sure.
They weren't enclosed in the plastic because they came in late. But they start with the W190 stamp on the bottom. They're not all stamped that, but they're all the same.
Right.
Your Honor, what was the total number that you said?
1,634.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Could you state your name, please?
Brian Bitner.
And Mr. Bitner, how long have you lived in Burleigh County?
Most of my life. I was born here. My folks lived in Devil's Lake for a few years and West Fargo for a year, and then I've been a resident here since I attended Rita Murphy School in 4th grade.
Okay. And do you live in Burleigh County, or do you live in the city of Bismarck?
I live in Burleigh County.
And can you just tell us briefly where your residence is, or where you live in Burleigh County?
If you go from the North Dakota Game and Fish, I'm 3 miles east and 0.8 of a mile south on 80th Street.
Okay. And you are the vice chair of the Burleigh County Commission?
Yes.
And have been a Burleigh County commissioner for a number of years?
About 15 years, yeah.
Okay. And in your role as a Burleigh County commissioner, have you had the Planning Commission for Burleigh County?
Yeah, since I got elected county commissioner, I've held the county planning commission seat. Prior to becoming elected, I served on the Bismarck Planning and Zoning Commission for some time before that.
Okay, so you have substantial experience with looking at growth plans and being involved in growth planning, both for the city of Bismarck and for Burleigh County?
Yeah, I wrote some of them. Yeah, a lot of them.
And my assumption is that in addition to serving on the Burleigh County Commission, you also have another full-time job, correct?
Yes.
And what do you do in your full-time job?
Currently, I'm a general contractor and have been for approximately 35 years. Prior to that, I was an electronics engineer, based on my experience and training in the Marine Corps.
And as both the vice chairman and a Burleigh County commissioner, have you been involved in evaluating the request by Summit to install a CO2 pipeline to go through Burleigh County?
I wouldn't say that we've had an opportunity to evaluate it, no.
Have you been involved in analyzing the propriety of having the pipeline go through Burleigh County?
Yes.
Okay. And so can you kind of walk us through chronologically from start to where we're at now, what involvement you've had and the Burleigh County Commission has in looking at the proposed Summit CO2 pipeline and its location in Burleigh County.
Sure, I'll try my best. I think it was probably in 2021 where I first started hearing about it. I had citizens calling me and were asking questions about a pipeline that's being proposed in Burleigh County, and they wanted to know what I knew about it, and I had nothing. So at some point in 2022, then we started getting additional information concerning the pipeline, and later on in 22, we started developing ordinances related to the pipelines until the final approval, I think, was in probably April of this year.
And when you say final approval of ordinances by Burleigh County relating to pipelines?
That should have been clear. That was final approval of the zoning ordinance that was adopted on 4/17 of 23. Prior to that, we had done quite a few statements and things such as a Burleigh County Board of Health statement, a home rule charter ordinance relating to the safety aspects of the pipeline. We developed what we saw as a proposed carbon pipeline route based on information from Summit, and then we moved into the actual zoning ordinance.
Okay. And is that part of the role, to your understanding of the Burleigh County Commission, is to try to assess the propriety or the appropriateness of a pipeline going through Burleigh County?
Sure it is. Burleigh County Commission and Burleigh County in general is charged with the responsibility of doing the citizens' work. And anything that happens, whether it's a land use thing such as subdivisions or commercial developments or anything like that, always has an impact of some sort on Burleigh County residents. So it's clearly in our wheelhouse.
And is part of the things that you look at as the Burleigh County Commission any public health risks or safety risks that might be involved in any project that's proposed for Burleigh County?
Yes, we would have the same concerns whether it was a pipeline or a hot dog stand, I guess.
And you mentioned that the way you learned about the possibility of there being a pipeline through Burleigh County was when you were approached by some citizens in Burleigh County?
Yes.
Okay. So I take it then Summit itself never approached the Burleigh County Commission or Burleigh County to ask them about what procedures were required by Burleigh County or how they should go about trying to comply with any requirements of Burleigh County?
Not in the early stages at all. At some point, I think there was one meeting between the county planning director and I think one meeting between the emergency management director, which was probably maybe the middle of last year, I think maybe July, around that time frame. But with respect to the meetings with the county planning director, our county planning director is in attendance, and I would refer to him for those specifics.
And did anyone from Summit ever come to Burleigh County to inquire about what procedures or requirements or ordinances Summit would need to consider or apply in terms of their proposal to build a pipeline through Burleigh County?
Again, not early on, but at some point that may have been part of the meeting, may or may not have been part of the meeting with our planning director.
Have there been a number of Burleigh County Commission meetings where the topic of the proposed Summit pipeline has come up?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when the earliest one was chronologically, approximately?
Approximately probably about this time, maybe a little bit earlier last year.
And have those been meetings that have been attended by the public?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And has the topic of the Summit pipeline come up at these county commission
Yes.
meetings, and the public has been allowed to comment?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the meetings where the Summit pipeline has come up, can you tell us approximately how many meetings there has been where there's been some public discussion about the proposed Summit pipeline?
Well, I believe there's been 4, possibly 5 meetings that were specifically relative to the pipeline, and probably some additional ones that referred to it.
So let's focus on the meetings before the county commission. Can you give us an approximation of how many public citizens from Burleigh County have attended those meetings, which you understand to be people who were interested in commenting upon and listening to Burleigh County's analysis of the proposed pipeline?
Right. I asked the question earlier of staff, and I didn't get a real good answer, but the capacity of the Tom Baker meeting room where we hold our meetings in the city-county building is probably around 100 people, give or take. I think that's a safe number. And virtually every one of these meetings have been standing room only. So I hope to answer your question that the meetings have been very well attended.
Okay. And in terms of the individuals who were there commenting on the Summit pipeline, have those individuals been some in favor, some against the pipeline?
There's two sides to that. We have had 2 or 3 Summit representatives that have attended those meetings. And so those 2 or 3, or possibly 4 total over a few meetings, may have been there to support the pipeline. But I can't recall a single citizen in Burleigh County supporting the pipeline at any of our meetings, at any meetings.
So all the citizens of Burleigh County that attended the Burleigh County Commission meetings where the topic of the Summit pipeline came up were uniformly opposed to the pipeline?
Yes.
Okay.
Which I should point out, that's a very unusual thing in Burleigh County. We've had a number of real controversial issues over the years, such as wind turbine sightings, such as refugee issues, such as several things like that. And there's always been 2 sides to the issue. Some citizens feel this way, some citizens feel that way, and you have to make a decision based on that. This is a completely different thing. This is 100% of the citizens that are presenting to us that are not affiliated with that company have been opposed to this.
And in addition to the public comment sessions at the Burleigh County Commission meetings, have you also personally received telephone calls and had personal meetings or encounters with Burleigh County citizens about the Summit pipeline?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the commissioners about that.
I can't remember an issue where I've gotten more comments. I would estimate starting out at least 100, if not more, individual comments. I get people pull me aside on the street, people I've never seen before, and are come up and are shaking my hand for the interest that I've had in the pipeline thing. And I never wanted to know anything about pipelines, but people are of a common frame of mind here.
Okay. And have any of those comments you've received by citizens of Burleigh County, whether by telephone or personal encounters, have any of those been in favor of the Summit pipeline?
None.
Have you also discussed that topic with the other Burleigh County commissioners?
Not outside of any meetings, but yes, we've talked about that at commission meetings.
Okay.
Mainly because it stands out so much to us. I can tell you, if you were going to run for election to the Burleigh County Commission and you were going to support this pipeline, you don't have a chance of getting elected in this county.
And how many Burleigh County commissioners are there?
There's 5.
Okay. And at the meetings you've had where the topic of the Summit pipeline has come up and been discussed with the other county commissioners, have any county commissioners at all told you they've received any comments from any citizen in Burleigh County who was in favor of the Summit pipeline?
No one's expressed that to me.
Okay. Have the other county commissioners told you they have also received an overwhelming number of contacts and had personal encounters with citizens in Burleigh counties all opposed to the Summit pipeline?
That's my understanding, yes.
Have all of these comments been comments that have been received by what I'll call people who have skin in the game, people who own land where the pipeline is coming across or close to where their land is?
No. No, I've gotten contacts from For lack of a better word, retired ladies that live in town and they pay attention to the meetings and they watch things on TV and a number of them don't even have internet access, but they'll watch it on TV, and they've been calling, expressing concerns about what could happen in Burleigh County. Some of them were with like a Bureau of Land Management retirees, and some are other government agency types that have had involvement in government-related stuff in the past.
Okay, are you familiar with the Together 2045 Bismarck's comprehensive plan?
I've read it cover to cover, but I wouldn't say I'm familiar with it, but I know of it. Yeah.
Okay. And could you turn to that? That's Exhibit W167 in your binder there.
167? Okay, not in mine. Okay. I'm struggling with that one, sir.
Did you find it?
No, it's not in mine. It must be 167. Okay.
Do you recognize that as the Together 2045 Bismarck Comprehensive Plan?
Yes.
Okay. And what's your understanding of what the purpose of the 2045 plan is by the City of Bismarck?
Well, the purpose is generally to lay out the concepts and procedures that would kind of guide, in a general fashion, the future development of the City of Bismarck.
Okay. And does the 2045 plan include what developments are present or are planned or may occur outside of Bismarck's extraterritorial limits?
I don't think so.
Okay. So this would be, the 2045 plan would be limited to either development within the City of Bismarck or their extraterritorial limits.
I think that would be appropriate, yeah.
Okay. And then is it Burleigh County then who would account for the growth outside of the extraterritorial limits
Correct.
Of the city?
Right. In Bismarck, Burleigh County, we have a division of the extraterritorial area. There's an actual 4-mile extraterritorial area, but in years past, I was part of the negotiations where the City of Bismarck maintains the sole jurisdiction in the 0 to 2 mile, and Burleigh County is the lead jurisdiction in the 2 to 4, and anything outside of the 2 to 4 that's in unorganized townships is Burleigh County zoning.
Okay. And so Burleigh County then, I think through Mr. Flanagan's office, prepares a growth plan specific to Burleigh County.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And could you look at Exhibit W191?
I just had it, but I know what you're talking about, but you can go ahead.
Should be in the same binder we just gave you. And it should have a tab on the side that says W191.
I see a 191.
Right, that's it. It's one page.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you recognize that to be a copy of the growth plan for Burleigh County?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in the upper right-hand corner, it says March 8, 2023.
Right.
Okay.
That's not the adoption date. That was the date that this particular map was put together, because this map was drawing out the proposed route based on information that was provided by Summit.
Okay. And then we can see on there the Summit pipeline, the proposed route is identified on Exhibit 191 by the red line.
Yes.
And who put that on there?
That would have been a Burleigh County GIS staff working with the county planning director.
With Mr. Flanagan?
Yes.
And do you believe this to show, based on GIS information, the location of the Summit proposed pipeline?
Right. It shows the approximate location based on information from Summit, and there is a disclaimer printed on it that said, due to the map scales and the PDF map, there could be up to a half-mile location error, but it's reasonably accurate for this purpose.
Okay. And this is something that Burleigh County had to prepare on its own. Summit didn't give Burleigh County a map showing where the pipeline was going to go through Burleigh County, correct?
I don't know that you could call it a map, but I would say a PDF map was used. PDF. Yeah.
And then can we see on here the developments in Burleigh County that exist, which are rural developments which would be outside of the extraterritorial limits of Bismarck?
I couldn't say that it's complete on that.
But you can see some of them
Yes.
that are outside the extraterritorial limits.
Yes.
Okay.
Clearly, I mean, Burleigh County has over 350 subdivisions. And that goes anywhere from 1 to 2 lot subdivisions up to 400 or 500 homes in a subdivision.
So in Burleigh County, there are 350 subdivisions?
Approximately, yes.
In Burleigh County, and would most of them be closer into Bismarck itself?
Most of them.
Now, in terms of these developments, and I see on here that they can be identified different ways by the colors. We have yellow, which is outlying suburban. What does that mean when we see on the growth map the yellow and it's identified as outlying suburban?
That would generally refer to what we would call large lot subdivisions. Sometimes that acre and a half, maybe up to as much as 5 acres per lot.
Okay. And can we see on the growth plan for Burleigh County that there's yellow that's on both sides of the proposed path of the Summit Pipeline, particularly directly to the north of Bismarck, both on the east and west side of Highway 83?
Right. Yes, I can see that, but I should point out, based on my knowledge here, that existing subdivisions up in that area are not on this map.
Okay.
I think this map is maybe 2014, maybe 2015 vintage.
Okay. And but that's the most current growth map that Burleigh County has,
Yes.
correct?
Correct. It's due to be reviewed.
Okay.
Try to get this done every 5-10 years, but we're busy too.
So this would be, what we're seeing on there for the existing subdivisions would be as of 2014, 2050.
Yes.
Many more closer to the pipeline or on both north and south of that are already built.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And not only that, I asked the planning director if we have subdivisions in the works that haven't made the agenda yet, and there's anywhere, I think there's up to possibly 8 subdivisions that are in the planning stages right now.
And we heard from Mr. Klusman and his family about their development. Is that one of the ones that are in the works right now?
Based on my knowledge of that, I'd have to say yes. I'm not sure what you heard on that. I wasn't here.
Okay. And are there other ones that you're aware of that are in process now in terms of other rural subdivisions?
Yes, according to the planning director. I specifically asked him that question about 10 minutes ago.
And according to Mr. Flanagan, how many are in process right now of rural subdivisions in Burleigh County?
I believe he told me approximately 8, but he's here and I'm sure he'll give exact information.
And do you know approximately where those 8 subdivisions in process are located at in relation to Bismarck?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, and then the other thing that's identified on Exhibit 191 is kind of a darker shade of yellow, or perhaps gold would be a better way to describe it, which is described it as suburban. What is suburban areas in?
That's what we would anticipate becoming part of city limits in the real near future. For example, like one that really comes to mind would be Silver Ranch subdivision.
Because on this map, that location would be on here, but it wouldn't be shown as being in the city, and in fact now portions of Silver Ranch.
Right, because, Silver Ranch just became a subdivision in the last year or two, and this map, of course, is 2014. So.
And then please look at Exhibit W195.
Okay.
And that's a map showing the location of the pipeline by the red line, and then the Mr. Moldenauer's Development Heritage Reserve directly adjacent to the southern portion of the pipeline. It's got a large block that says Heritage Reserve, and then it's got the location of the extraterritorial limits in a lighter shade of blue. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And does those appear to be the accurate extraterritorial limits for the city of Bismarck?
I would say yes.
Okay. And then on this map, we have actually identified some of the subdivisions that are already existing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah, that's...
And I mean, this is just in this location, but it appears there's close to 20 subdivisions already in existence in that area south of Heritage Reserve, both on the east and west side of Highway 83.
Okay, I won't count them, but I'd say that's pretty close.
Okay. And we can see by the measurement which was done on GIS that if we take, for instance, Prairie Crest First Subdivision, that's 1.65 miles from the proposed Summit Pipeline, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Moldenauer's development is 1,900 feet from the pipeline, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Northwood Estates existing subdivision is 1.4 miles south of the pipeline, correct?
Yes.
And then 4K's replat, we heard about that from one of the witnesses earlier today, is something less than 2 miles from the pipeline, correct?
And it looks that way on this map, yeah.
So there's already in existence multiple subdivisions with many homes in them located within 2 miles and some much less than 2 miles of the proposed Summit Pipeline, correct?
Yes.
And that continues to be the case as we work our way east along the proposed pipeline route and we get to Country Hills and Country Hills second subdivision, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know that to be a rather large subdivision, Country Hills?
That's some of the bigger ones, yes.
Okay. Do you know roughly how many homes are in the Country Hill subdivisions?
I don't, but I'm sure it's in the hundreds.
And those are all existing homes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as being the Vice Chair of the County Commission, being involved in planning and growth for over 15 years, both for Burleigh County and for the city of Bismarck, do you know something about the value of the rural acreage in these areas?
I know a little bit about it, yes.
Okay. And is Burleigh County one of the few counties in the states that allows rural subdivisions?
I think Burleigh County is one of the only counties in the state that allows rural subdivisions.
So the Bismarck area is somewhat unique from the rest of the state and the cities and counties in the respect that it's one of the only ones where these rural subdivisions are allowed to be built.
Yes.
Okay. And how did that come about? Why is that?
I think people got together, landowners probably at some point in the past, and it's my opinion. Okay, I don't have any fact on this, but they pressured the government, the local government, enough to where the government really didn't have a choice but to allow rural subdivisions. There was a demand. People want it. People like me. I didn't want to live in town. I want to live out on 15 acres or something and have some space and have room for the kids and toys and those sort of things.
And how long has that been the case that Burleigh County has consistently been allowing rural subdivisions to be built and developed?
Since at least the 70s, if not earlier.
And do you expect that practice to continue in the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, one of the concerns, and I think someone talked about it, one of the witnesses earlier today, is that as the city moves more outward, there's a concern about tying in city services to whatever services might exist in rural subdivisions that are outside the city limits.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? That
Yes.
is a concern?
Yeah, absolutely. We've taken great efforts in Burleigh County to try to address that. This is one of the things that has happened in the past where rural subdivisions were being developed and nobody knew how to incorporate them into the city when the city grew to that point. And there's a few of us that had a conversation, and well, I can tell you it was on the ranch subdivision. It was Dave Andall, and it was Jim Small, and it was me. And we came up with a way, and Jim Small found a company that was making these systems that are called a community septic system. So that what this does is it builds infrastructure in these rural subdivisions that's exactly like the city. You got your city water and essentially city sewer, where the effluent and whatnot is going to these central sewer systems. So when the city ultimately gets there, there's no increased cost for infrastructure because the infrastructure is already built. And that was hugely successful for the county and the city to address that kind of concern.
And so the central sewer system is intended to allow these subdivisions as the city grows to be able to integrate with existing city services.
Exactly right. Yeah, the pipes, the sizes, the everything is exactly what you would do in the city, but it's out in the rural subdivisions.
Okay. And then we talked about values of land in rural Burleigh County, and if we talk about these areas south of the pipeline, 3-4 miles out from the city of Bismarck, do you know generally what development land has been selling for in those locations?
Yeah, I've bought a bit of it myself. I think there's a range of land depending on the quality of the land. There's range in value based on the quality of the land. Some of the stuff has got wetlands and some of it's got a lot of hills and it might not be as preferable. But generally speaking, I see prices anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 an acre.
And then you mentioned the other places in North Dakota. So if we take as an example Fargo, are there other challenges there that Burleigh County doesn't have in terms of rural subdivisions such as water table issues?
Yeah, that would be a clear issue out in the Fargo and certainly probably even the Grand Forks area because of the kind of flooding and stuff they have. Groundwater is a big deal to them. East of Bismarck, groundwater starts to become a problem, so that's going to kind of limit the development of the city moving to the east. And of course, the south is more floodplain, and we know from 2011 that we want to avoid floodplains where we can. So, there's those other cities have probably more challenges, and plus their ag land is probably more valuable than ours.
Since you've been involved in planning both for the city of Bismarck and then the last 15 years for Burleigh County, what has the direction of growth been for the city of Bismarck into Burleigh County?
There's been limited growth on the south, out around the University of Mary area, limited growth to the east, kind of out around me, around Highway 10, extending out now 3 miles. I'm pretty much on the end of, nearly on the edge of the subdivisions to the east, and then the growth has been focusing north and northeast.
Okay. And do you expect that to be the path of growth for Bismarck continuing in the future?
Oh, yes.
For the
Yes.
foreseeable time to the north and east?
Yes.
Let's turn to your communications with Summit and what Summit has done, if anything, to try to determine the safest and best route around Bismarck. Has anyone from Summit at any time contacted you or the Burleigh County Commission as to what the safest route would be around Bismarck for the Summit pipeline?
No.
Has anyone from Summit ever contacted you or contacted the Burleigh County Commission or anyone at Burleigh County, to your knowledge, to ask what would be the best route to provide the minimal adverse effects on public health and the economy for Bismarck and Burleigh County?
No.
When a pipeline company, and I'm assuming there's been a number of pipeline companies over the years that you've been a Burleigh County Commissioner, that have installed or expanded on existing pipelines, correct?
I don't know that any of them have expanded or added on, but there's been a number of pipelines in the county, yes.
Sure. And when pipelines are going to be installed in the Burleigh County, is it typical that the pipeline company would contact Burleigh County, including the Commission, about constructing and routing a pipeline through Burleigh County?
It wouldn't have been the case in the past necessarily because we didn't have a county planning and zoning, separate planning and zoning department until I created it. And so that wouldn't have been a part of the ordinance thing. We didn't have ordinances that applied to pipelines or hazardous liquid pipelines until final adoption this year.
Okay. How long has there been a planning and zoning department?
I'm drawing a blank on that one, but 8 years, 10 years, maybe.
Is that who would typically be consulted in regards to gas and sewer and oil or any type of pipelines is county planning and zoning?
It will now, yes. Wouldn't have been before, I don't think.
Well, would it have been since there's a planning and zoning department? Is that who they would typically go to?
In most cases, you would. And I'm thinking that probably in almost every one of those pipeline issues, that would have been at the City Planning and Zoning Commission because all those pipelines are inside that extraterritorial area, if not inside the existing city limits. So that wouldn't have necessarily been a county issue to begin with.
If there's pipelines that get installed in the city and would also go into Burleigh County, is that something that you would learn about as a Burleigh County Commissioner?
I probably wouldn't learn about it at the County Commission, but I would definitely learn about it at the City Planning Commission.
Okay. And the mayor does, in fact, sit or attend the Burleigh County Commission meetings, is that correct?
Say that again?
The mayor of the city of Bismarck, does he have some role in relation to the Burleigh County Commission?
No, not the County Commission. He does have a seat, him and one additional city commissioner on the County Planning Commission.
Okay. So the County Planning Commission then would typically learn from the mayor interaction there about what is happening in the city and vice versa.
Possibly.
Has Summit ever expressed willingness or approached Burleigh County about the possibility of looking at an alternative route for the Summit pipeline?
No, I would say the opposite is true.
And when you say the opposite is true, what do you mean by that?
Well, based on testimony at the last meeting before this commission, the pipeline company said that they were not going to relocate that pipe.
Has Summit ever provided any information to suggest that it's not feasible or it's too costly to move the Summit pipeline further away from the path of development in Burleigh County?
Well, I think I received a copy of something yesterday or the day before that referred to that, but not before that.
Okay. And I think what you're referring to there is, I believe it was on May 30 or May 31st, Summit provided to the PSC a pipeline analysis where they came to the conclusion that they didn't think it was feasible to pursue a southern route through Burleigh County. Is that what you're referring to?
That's what I'm referring to, yes.
Now, am I correct in understanding that Burleigh County has taken a position in opposition to the proposed route by Summit of the pipeline through Burleigh County?
Yes.
And tell me how that was taken up by the Burleigh County Commission.
Based on the series of meetings that we've had, the public sentiment from the citizens is very clear to us as a commission that this is not a route that the citizens of Burleigh County approve of. And my responsibility as a county commissioner is to respond to the citizens of Burleigh County.
And could you look at Exhibit 114?
You guys killed a lot of trees here, didn't you? Okay, got it.
And that's Exhibit W114, and is that a copy of the ordinance adopted by Burleigh County on March 6, 2023?
It appears to be, yes.
And that's in relation to hazardous liquid pipelines?
Yes.
And then before this ordinance would have passed and been adopted on March 6, 2023, would there have been a series of meetings before that where this ordinance was discussed and public comment was allowed?
Yes, there was quite a few meetings that involved this. First of all, in order to do an ordinance for Burleigh County that would have any teeth to it, we had to make we had to go to the electors of Burleigh County for an amendment to the Burleigh County Home Rule Charter, which the only time we've ever dealt with the Home Rule Charter was when we put a sales tax up for the jail. There's a half-cent sales tax for the Burleigh County Jail. And so citizens came to us asking for an ordinance related to pipelines, and this safety ordinance was the soonest that we could do based on the Home Rule Charter change that was at our last election in Burleigh County. So we actually did the Home Rule Charter change to create ordinances under the Home Rule Charter because of a totally different issue. The issue at that point was motorcycles and ATVs in the public right-of-ways, tearing up the ditches. You know, you've probably seen all the ruts out in the ditches. But the ordinance, this kind of took priority over that because of the urgency and the thing coming up before the Public Service Commission, so that became the focus.
Okay. And from start until March 6, 2023, when that ordinance was adopted, was that a somewhat lengthy process?
Yes.
Okay. Approximately how long between when the discussion about the request by the citizens for an ordinance to when it was ultimately?
Well, I'd say the Home Rule Charter ordinance discussion happened probably a year before anything came up with the pipeline.
And so there's this, and I'm jumping ahead a bit, but there's this hazardous liquid pipeline ordinance from Burleigh County, W-114, and then there's the one dated April 17, 2023, which is W-186, and it's also called hazardous liquid pipelines. What's the difference between those two ordinances?
That's a good question. The first one, the Home Rule Charter Ordinance, is specifically related to safety and safety expectations of the county. In there, I think we're clear that we're asking for your pipeline company's safety plans, mitigation plans, and things like that, so that we can prepare our county emergency management for what you would expect as a hazard, or how you would respond to a situation with a pipeline. And then the zoning ordinance gets into more detail that talks about distances from structures, or distances from the water plant and things like that. More details in the second one.
And then looking at the March 6, 2023 ordinance, if we turn to the second page, there's different headings. There's a listing of the purposes. You see that there?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And then there's certain items that are supposed to be followed up by pipeline companies in terms of information and documents they're supposed to provide to Burleigh County. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so if we look at, as an example, subsection Roman numeral 3, one of the things the pipeline company who is applying to build the pipeline in Burleigh County is supposed to do is submit a public safety plan?
Yes.
Okay. After this ordinance went into effect on March 6, 2023, did Summit file or provide a public safety plan to Burleigh County?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
One of the other things that Summit was supposed to do after March 6, 2023 was provide Burleigh County with an emergency action plan, information disclosure requirements. Did Summit do that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. One of the other things, Roman numeral 5, that Summit is supposed to do with Burleigh County is provide a emergency response and hazard mitigation plans for hazardous liquid pipelines. Did they do that?
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
And
I was going to add something, but I won't.
okay, and there was a letter sent to the Burleigh County Planning Department by Summit by Mr. Jeff Scari on March 8, 2023, on behalf of Summit objecting to this ordinance. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. So rather than complying with the requirements of the new by Burleigh County on hazardous liquid pipelines, Summit just said they objected to it.
Yeah, I'm amazed by that. I can't imagine why anybody would have an objection to providing us with your safety plan. Our concerns as a county is for the citizens. You know, we put this in here so that we have some way to know what's going on with this thing. And if you can't provide me with any sort of safety plan, am I supposed to task our staff with creating a safety plan? And we don't know the hazards. We don't know the things. Well, we're learning those hazards now. But I'm very stunned that anybody would have an issue and protest providing a safety plan. I'm a general contractor. We're on many jobs we're required to have a safety plan and have that available on a job site. This is nothing new. So I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to have a safety plan. And further, I read in the application for this permit that this company says the applicant will obtain and comply with any ordinances or local land use and permits and things like that. And yet here we are, we're getting notice that they're either objecting to them or they've asked you guys to just disregard our ordinances. How is that possible? We developed ordinances based on public input, not knee-jerk reactions to anything. But these guys are acting like we don't have any reason to be concerned about safety. And I got news flash for you. We are concerned about the safety for the citizens in Burleigh County. I have to be able to, at the best, protect the interests of the citizens, and I need to be able to evacuate. How do I evacuate people when they won't even tell me what the hazard is? They don't have any kind of odorant or colorant in this stuff, and we're supposed to just do what? Sit on our heels? We've got very, very good emergency response in Burleigh County. We've got outstanding sheriff's department and fire department, and our emergency management is second to none, and we just don't have any information outside of speculation on how we deal with this. And that's a concern for me as a commissioner. I need to know how am I going to evacuate close to however many thousands of people that could be affected by this, depending on what direction this thing would go if it had a problem.
And you just mentioned the application. Could you turn to Exhibit Summit 1? It's not in that same binder. It's a Summit binder with their exhibits in it.
Okay. Okay.
And Summit 1 is the application by Summit that they submitted to the Public Service Commission back on October 17, 2022. And let's turn to page 61.
60. You know, I must be looking at the wrong thing here.
Yeah, it's got various parts. We can maybe help you find page 61.
Okay, I can find it in mine. Yeah. Okay.
You have that in front of you? Okay. So let's turn to Summit's application, section 10.9, land use. And that says the applicant, meaning Summit, the applicant will obtain and comply with applicable county permits and zoning and land use regulations. Permits for the project may include but are not limited to building permits, grade and fill permits, ditch crossing permits, road and utility permits, and conditional use permits. Have I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And the ordinance, the March 6, 2023 ordinance and the April 17, 2023 ordinance, would that fall under zoning and land use regulations?
Absolutely.
Okay. That Summit told the PSC in their application on October 17, 2022, they will comply with. Okay. And even up to today, Summit has not done that in Burleigh County, correct?
Did your microphone turn off? Should be just that.
Okay, how's that?
That's better,
I
thank
hit
you.
it with one of these.
I know, right?
And yesterday with the PSC, the attorneys for Summit filed a motion to declare Emmons County and Burleigh County ordinances superseded and preempted. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of that. Yes.
Okay. And one of the claims that they're making in their motion is they say because the county ordinances ban hazardous liquid pipelines in Emmons, Burleigh County, they are by definition unreasonably restrictive and conflict with North Dakota law. Do either of these ordinances by Burleigh County, either on March 6, 2023 or April 17, 2023, ban hazardous liquid pipelines?
No, that was never the intention of Burleigh County. The only thing is, at one point, we submitted some documentation to the PSC about where we were at with the process, And staff from PSC notified Burleigh County that under the terms of the draft or the proposed final was that based on the distance from transmission lines that it looked like we could ban the pipelines entirely, but that was not the intent of the plan. So what I did is I made the motion to reconsider after we got that information at the next meeting after the final approval, the motion to reconsider, and we changed that to some other distance because we were working with Capital Electric Cooperative on what would be an appropriate distance should there be one of those blast zone type of things from a pipeline, and we want to try to make sure that the critical infrastructure in Burleigh County was not damaged by a problem with that pipeline. So, we never intended that a pipeline be banned in Burleigh County. Sorry, it's a long answer.
Sure. And one of the things that's mentioned in the March 6, 2023 ordinance is PHMSA. And what is Burleigh County's position in relation to the Summit Pipeline and PHMSA regulations?
Well, our based on conversations at the County Commission, and of course I'm not speaking for the County Commission today, but our position is that due to the information we've gotten from PHMSA and from federal government is that their own regulations are insignificant or insufficient, I should say, to the regulation of the CO2 pipelines. That's my understanding from the actual government agency.
Okay. And is it your understanding and that the PHMSA regulations are in the process of being re-examined and reconsidered to have some rules and regulations that apply specifically to CO2 pipelines?
Yes, I've read that in official government documents. Yes.
And is Burleigh County requesting that before the PSC might give due consideration to the application by Summit that they should wait until those new PHMSA regulations that are supposed to come out as early as 2024, specifically relating to CO2, be in place and considered?
Yeah, we think it would be prudent to either deny the route permit as it currently stands, or at the very least delay it until these new regulations in place so we can see if this thing complies with the known risks and the advice from the federal government.
Let's turn to the April 17, 2023 ordinance. In advance of that ordinance, which is W-186, was there also a similar public comment session to discuss that proposed ordinance?
Yes.
And that ordinance was passed on April 17, 2023. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Both the March and April ordinances, what was the vote on that by the 5 county commissioners?
Unanimous.
Unanimous
to support the ordinance.
Have any of the county commissioners in any of these meetings expressed support for the Summit Pipeline?
No.
Okay. Is the reason, to your understanding, that the Burleigh County Commissioners to a person are opposed to the Summit Pipeline is due to the public health risk should a leak occur?
That's certainly one of the reasons.
Okay. And what are the other reasons that the Burleigh County Commissioners are opposed to the Summit Pipeline in its proposed location in Burleigh County?
There's been a long list of reasons given by people, and it's everything from fear of the unknown to concerns based on what people have learned from the Satarsha incident. I had a list here someplace where I was keeping some of those things. There's somebody says, well, we bury our family below 6 feet so they don't surface in the winter. Before I got sidetracked on that one, I did a little research on, there were some people that were mentioning a concern about frost heave with these pipelines, and I would tend to agree that there's less of a risk of frost heave with this pipeline simply because they got an operating temperature that would probably offset some of that. I don't know that it would be sufficient, but I do know that they're running at a little warmer temperature. During my research, one of the bigger concerns for ag land is that the increased temperature in the soil based on NDSU research has a negative impact on the soil biome, and it will decrease production because it affects the microorganisms down in the soil and increases the drying of the soil, so it's less likely to be productive farmland. That caught me by surprise because I was researching the opposite. So, sorry I got off on that. But there's other things, the questions whether it meets the National Environmental Policy Act. How about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife? The road crossings are a big concern. Somebody's coming along, driving along in the middle of the night. You could have a thing like happened down in Sioux County where this thing blows a road out overnight and in the dark or the fog, and somebody's coming and driving along. People get concerned about those kind of things because they worry about their family, and especially if there's a break and you can't tell what it is, how do you know to protect yourself? I'm a certified scuba diver, and I own 5 scuba tanks that are within walking distance of me when I'm at home. And if I can't tell what the problem is, and I'm suddenly choking out in my own yard, I wouldn't even be able to save my own life, let alone evacuate citizens and save them. And I'm sorry, but that's unacceptable to me as a commissioner. Again, sorry I blew up.
So turning back to the April 17, 2023 ordinance, let's look at that. That's W-186. Do you have that available to you?
186?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that's the one passed on April 17.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I verified that because we changed the wording on that statement for the setback from the electrical.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you about. In addition to the other requirements that Summit is supposed to comply with, there are some additional provisions contained in the April 17 ordinance, and I am looking at subpart Roman numeral 9, and this isn't paginated, but it would be the 4th page end under the heading Special Use Permits. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And so has Summit complied with that special use permit required?
Not that I know of.
Okay. And then if you turn to the next page, there's also separation requirements that were adopted in the ordinance and minimum separation distances for a hazardous pipeline.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And the ordinance says that the minimum separation distance from the extraterritorial line of an incorporated city is not less than 10 miles.
Yes.
Okay. And so that would include Bismarck because that's an incorporated city.
Yes.
Okay. So there's been in existence since April 17, 2023, a Burleigh County ordinance indicating that there's supposed to be at least 10 miles between the extraterritorial limits of Bismarck and the location of any Summit pipeline or other hazardous pipeline.
Yes.
Okay. And this proposed route would not comply with that provision in the ordinance?
No.
Not even close?
No.
Okay.
I should point out that I read something recently that was handed to me where Summit was challenging these ordinances, and in their challenge they referred to 10 miles from an electric power generating facility. They provided that to you folks, and I don't know where they came up with that because, like I said, we changed that to a more reasonable 1,000 foot, so that it wasn't zoning out the pipeline.
And that was to the electrical generation?
Correct.
But this 10 10 mile from the extraterritorial line still is the ordinance.
Yep, that stands.
Incidentally, before these ordinances were adopted by Burleigh County, was the county attorney, Ms. Lawyer, involved in assisting the county in determining whether these ordinances were legal and in compliance with law?
Definitely, yes.
And did she review these and have a hand in the drafting of these before these were adopted?
Absolutely, and she made significant changes of her own, yes.
Another minimum separation requirement under the ordinance is subpart 2 from a church, school, nursing home, long-term care facility, or hospital not less than 4 miles, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the current proposed route that is within several miles of Silver Ranch School and less than 2 miles from the Naughton School, that would not be in compliance with this ordinance.
No, there's I think 3 or 4 schools that are closer than that, if not 5.
And then the distance between any occupied structure not less than 2 miles, the proposed route would not be in compliance with that portion of the ordinance.
No.
Okay. I think we've seen on Exhibit 137 put together by Mr. Flanagan, there is an identification of about 1,200 911 points within less than 2 miles of the Summit Pipeline. Does those 911 points mean there's an occupied structure?
Yes.
Okay. So they would have violated at least that provision, or that provision in the ordinance at least 1,200 times by
Yes.
their proposing to place the pipeline.
Yes.
And then there's a requirement of a setback from Missouri River, setback not less than 1 mile parallel to the ordinary high water mark, unless a non-development floodplain permit is required. Do you know whether they've complied with that or not?
No, I don't know because they haven't built the pipeline yet.
Your Honor, I'm going to interrupt here, and I don't know if we can short circuit this a little bit. But it seems to me that the testimony is going to be is there hasn't been compliance with this ordinance. I don't know that we need to go through every single provision in here established.
Yeah, and that's not my plan. I'm just going through some of the ones that I think are more important that he is able to testify there was non-compliance, but I'm trying to speed this up as much as I can.
Your Honor?
Yep.
On that topic, I will just throw out that if over an hour with one witness is sped up, if that's as much as Mr. Bakke can speed things up, and I think he wanted to call 4 or 5 witnesses, he will essentially have frozen out any more chance for public testimony.
Well, and my intent is, because we're going to go past the dinner time, is to take our dinner break, and then after dinner, we're going to take all the rest of the public testimony, and then whatever time is left, Mr. Bakke, you'll have for the rest of your witnesses. So just so you're aware.
Yeah, I think Mr. Bitner will be one of my longer witnesses, so I'm expecting the others won't be quite as long.
I'm just a lucky guy, aren't I?
You and I have different definitions of lucky.
Yeah. It's like dodging bullets. Go ahead.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of the April 17 ordinances, there is a public hearing requirement and permit approval process that Summit has to go through with Burleigh County?
Yes.
Okay. And have they applied for a permit approval with Burleigh County?
Not that I'm aware of, but our planning director could address that.
So this process of them obtaining a permit will allow for public comment, and the public can come in and weigh in and voice their concerns either for or against the permit approval by Summit.
Yes.
As part of that permit approval process, would they have to show they complied with the requirements of the ordinance?
Yes.
And one other area I'd like to touch on briefly in the ordinance is if you turn to, I believe it's subsection 12, it's towards the end, it deals with a hazard mitigation plans for hazardous liquid pipelines.
Emergency response, yes.
Yes. And part of the requirement is 2.8.2, which is referred to as a rupture dispersion modeling report, containing the results of a computational fluid dynamic computer model. Is that what you understand has been referred to in this proceeding as a plume model?
Yes.
Okay. And why is it that Burleigh County has requested that any hazardous pipeline company like Summit provide a plume model or a rupture dispersion model?
Well, that's pretty simple, because we'd like to be able to train our staff in expectations and have plans and policies in place that would address, if this happens, do this. What we do in emergency management is we address the hazards such as flooding, and we make plans on how do you deal with it. So something like that information would inform our policies and procedures manuals for how we would respond in the event of an accident or a catastrophe.
And is that for the public health and safety, so that you can look at that plume model and provide information to the public, or the company with the pipeline can provide information to the public as to what they should do, what they should plan for, how they should react in the event there was a leak? Yeah.
We'd certainly want to try to do some kind of education program or something for what people do. I mean, we've got a city here, and can we rely on building managers and people within their individual buildings to know to turn off your air intake systems or something like that? I don't know how we train people to do that. And we don't, we've got a reverse 911 system here, but I'm not sure we have, well, I know for a fact we don't have everybody involved in it, because you had to voluntarily sign up, and a lot of people don't want to give their cell phone numbers to the government. So there'd be people, there's no way that we could reach some people. And so having those plans in place would enable us to understand the risk and deal with it.
And be fair to say Summit has not provided this rupture dispersion model or any plume study to Burleigh County?
Correct. They've not. They said at a meeting that they would provide that to us, but they never said when. I could speculate on why not.
And so far they haven't provided it?
No, not that I'm aware of.
There's also, in the same section under emergency response, a requirement that the pipeline company provide a list of high consequence areas. And Summit has indicated in this application that there are 2 high consequence areas in North Dakota along the pipeline, but they refuse to identify where those are. And in terms of this list of high consequence area, would I be correct in understanding that has not been provided to Burleigh County either?
No, and I want to elaborate a little bit on that particular subject. A high consequence area in Burleigh County, that's probably open to interpretation on what that is, but I think your house, and your house is still a high consequence area. I don't want to go out there and be collecting up bodies in the event of an accident. I want to know more about what do we do, how do we prevent it, things like that. But I don't know who's going to determine what a high consequence area is. Is it 1 body? Is it 10 bodies? What is high consequence? Nobody's defined that for us. I'm sorry. I understand about the time thing, but
let's turn to the Burleigh County Board of Health statement. Did Burleigh County, before these ordinances were passed, issue a Board of Health statement?
yes.
Okay. And is that Exhibit W104 in your binder?
Yes.
Okay, and just quickly, what did the Board of Health statement by Burleigh County indicate?
Well, it basically indicates that we're concerned about the public health in Burleigh County as it relates to hazardous liquid pipelines.
And is that due to the public health risk should there be a leak?
Yes.
Let's turn to one final topic, and that is the economics. Whether there's any economic benefit to Burleigh County to this proposed Summit pipeline using its proposed route. I'm assuming, like most counties, Burleigh County is reliant on its tax revenue from residents for its budget and for its spending.
Yeah, that's not an assumption, that's a fact.
And so what, if any, tax benefits would there be to Burleigh County in the event that the Summit pipeline was built in its proposed route, or anywhere in Burleigh County?
Well, at this point, I'd be relying on information that was provided to Burleigh County by that company. That company said that there may be some tax benefit to Burleigh County, but I'm not aware of what that amount would be and what it would be based on. And it's my understanding that those tax dollars aren't being spent by Summit anyway. I think the state of North Dakota is going to be paying those property taxes for the first 10 years, so it looks like it's my tax dollars paying it. But they did discuss some benefit at one of the meetings, and there was some reference to benefit to local farmers who may be selling corn to ethanol plants. But I know a lot of large operators, and they pretty much have their crops committed to either Richardson or Underwood or over there by Fargo. They said there'd be some possible tax benefit. I think they referred to some $400 and some odd $1,000 per year of property taxes. But I don't know that doesn't make my tail wag, because I have information here from our tax director that on two subdivisions that were located right on this map that you showed me earlier. I want to deviate there a little bit, and I'll take some liberty. But the ranch subdivision up north of the pipeline and this heritage reserve that's south of the pipeline, when those two subdivisions are built out completely, and looking at the average price of a home in those subdivisions, so the ranch subdivision, they have the potential of $63.5 million worth of residential value and $3.4 million of commercial value. So the potential tax revenue for the ranch, when it's completely built out, for the residential values is $505,000, $55,60. For the $3,400 or $3,400,000 commercial values is $30,030, for a total estimated at current mill rates of $535,000, $86.10. And then for the Heritage Reserve subdivision on the other side of the pipeline, when those 100 to 150 lots are fully built out at their average price of approximately $750,000, and we know there's some that are a little bit less and some that are more, they're looking at an additional tax revenue of $596,000, $193.75 per year. So just those two subdivisions, you might remember I mentioned we have probably 350 subdivisions, but just those two are looking at over $1 million in tax revenue per year for Burleigh County, and that's without the pipeline in place. Thank you.
And there are, as you said, in the Burleigh County area in the path of this, literally dozens of other subdivisions and more that would be built if the pipeline isn't there.
Yeah, clearly, yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about Summit contributing supposedly up to $400,000 a year, not paid by them, paid by the state of North Dakota, versus many millions of dollars being paid by rural subdivisions that would continue to develop in the area of the pipeline.
Right. As a Burleigh County Commissioner, I'll take one ranch subdivision over a CO2 pipeline. It's more valuable to the county.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
All right. Mr. Malberg, any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
Mr. Bitner, it's good to see you again. We'll start at the back end there. I just want to understand the testimony you just gave about the tax revenues. the information you're providing there is assuming that development stops immediately upon approval of a pipeline or doesn't continue, you're going to lose the
No.
$500,000 apiece in each of those
That's not what I
divisions?
said.
Okay. And so thanks. Clarify it for me, because I thought I heard you saying nobody's going to build those anymore if this pipeline gets built.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say anything of the sort. I said that on full build-out of the ranch subdivision, we would anticipate, based conservatively on the value of what we think it would be, the ranch would provide approximately $535,086.10 per year, and the full build-out of the Heritage Reserve would be $596,100. Okay, so I didn't refer to anything, whether they're built or not.
Thank you. And I had caught that as you were relaying, that was the estimated lost revenues coming in.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe if we stay there for a second, you've been in Burleigh County a long time. You're aware that there are hazardous liquids, natural gas transmission lines in the city of Bismarck and through Burleigh County, right?
I kind of question your reference to hazardous liquids and applying that to natural gas or even oil. I paid money to have the natural gas line run up to my shop and to my house. I don't consider that a hazardous liquid. That's a necessity to me. I just spent, I don't know, $10,000 on getting that done. But when I first started hearing about pipelines, just so we can head that off, I wasn't all that worried about it because I thought we have pipelines, and the pipelines have not been much of a problem in Burleigh County. It wasn't until your guys told me about the Satarsha, Mississippi thing and handed me this brief 10 or 12 page summary of Satarsha that I started to get concerned, and I researched it.
Sure. So let's be clear about one thing too. I guess when I talk about a transmission line, a hazardous liquid or a natural gas transmission line, we're not talking about the service line for gas that comes to your house. You understand that, right?
Well, I think I understand the difference between the gas line to my house and a pipeline. Yeah.
Well, they're both pipelines. One's a transmission line, one's a service line. You understand that there are transmission pipelines.
Of course.
In Bismarck and in Burleigh County, right?
Yes, sure.
And those are the natural gas lines would be the MDU and the WBI, and the New Star pipeline has refined products, right?
Yeah.
And so when I say a transmission line, that's what I'm talking about. I just want to make sure we're using the same concepts. You've been around.
So
long
you're not.
enough.
Yeah, I understand. You're not referring to a residential line versus a commercial line. Okay.
Sure, we can make that. That's a fine difference.
Fine.
You've been around long enough that you've watched Bismarck grow, and you've watched Burleigh County grow, despite the presence of those transmission lines, right?
Yes.
Growth has gone on unimpeded by those transmission lines, right?
You would say that. I don't know that I would.
Do you disagree with that?
Yeah.
So your position, Mr. Bitner, is that the transmission lines that exist have impeded development.
Look, I think if you're a developer, and I do know pretty much every one of them, I think you're less likely to develop a property around any pipeline if you can. That's not their preferred land. I mean, I don't think most Burleigh County citizens are overly concerned about those particular lines you're talking about, but we're here talking about a CO2 pipeline.
Fair. So you're drawing a distinction. You're saying that the CO2 pipeline presents a different risk, and to you, most Burleigh County residents see it differently. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's a different risk to me based on information that we see from the Satarsha incident, yeah.
Sure. So you personally, Mr. Bitner, don't have a background in pipeline safety, right?
Well, actually, I kind of do. At one point, I had a contract for maintaining the nitrogen plant out at the refinery, which is actually probably more of an asphyxiant. Well, I know it's more of an asphyxiant than carbon dioxide. So in that case, one breath you're dying, two breaths you're dead because your body goes into what's called reverse aspiration. So I actually do have experience in hazardous liquids.
But that wasn't my question. My question was about pipelines.
Okay.
Okay. I asked at the beginning of the hearing, and I'm just going to remind everybody in the audience, please refrain from commenting, laughing, groaning, those type of things. We need to maintain decorum. This is an administrative hearing. So please refrain from those types of behaviors. Thank you.
And I'm just trying to be precise with it, Mr. Bitner, so that we have a clear record. If I ask you about pipelines and I get an answer about something else, I'm just going to circle back on it. From a pipeline perspective, you don't have an expertise in pipelines, right?
Well, you know, I have the technical background and training to where I am an expert in a few different things. And when I maintained that nitrogen plant at the refinery, I was the expert.
In pipelines.
On-call expert. We were putting hazardous liquid in the pipeline that serviced the refinery. Not the type of pipeline, not a 24-inch CO2 pipeline, if that's your question.
And that is. I'm talking about the sort of pipeline diameters and pressures that we're talking about here. You're not an expert in that. I think we can agree on that. You've got your expertise. No doubt. No, not questioning that. You're also not an expert in the way that PHMSA regulates transmission pipelines like this, right?
Correct.
You understand, correct, that PHMSA does in fact regulate emergency response and public awareness programs, and a lot of the topics that the ordinance that you led in adopting for the county are overlapping with, right?
No, I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware when you were passing your ordinances of the scope of PHMSA's regulatory authority and jurisdiction?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't know anything about PHMSA. I just know what happens in Burleigh County.
And that's fair. And so when Burleigh County was going about enacting its ordinances, it wasn't taking into account PHMSA's regulatory authority, right?
Well, I think we were taking it into account. You were
just said you knew nothing about it.
I'm not personally concerned with PHMSA, but yes,
Your Honor,
we were taking it into account.
Your Honor, can he be allowed to finish his answer before he gets interrupted by Mr. Malber?
I just asked both of you not to talk over each other because that's an issue when we try to make it.
Well, it's got a little bit combative here, and I apologize that I react that way.
Mr. Bitner, if we talk about the ordinance and the reconsideration piece that you talked about, there was a provision, you'll correct me on the date if I'm wrong, I'm sure on the April 17th, I think, ordinance that had the change in electric lines and generating plants. The setback went from 10 miles down to 1,000 feet.
Right.
Right? Where is it with the setbacks that were passed that a hazardous liquids pipeline can be sited in Burleigh County?
I don't know. We didn't look for an area and say, well, if we write this thing a certain way that it could go someplace. We were writing this concerning the public safety and things like that, and based on citizen input and public meetings. We weren't picking a route for you, if that's what you're asking.
So Burleigh County does not know whether a hazardous liquids pipeline could be sited under its current ordinance, right?
No. Does not know,
Okay.
Because I testified earlier that it was not our intention to zone it out.
Right, you just don't know whether you did or didn't.
No, I don't.
If I understand it correctly, you changed the setback on an electric line from a 10-mile distance down to 1,000 feet for some reason, and I'm not asking the reason to get into that, but so long as there's a crossing, right, there can be no crossings of a hazardous liquid pipeline with a 69 kV or higher transmission line, right?
I can't answer that because that wouldn't have been the intent that I'm sure of. The point would be if there was a disruption in the pipeline that could cause a disruption in the power. That's something that would be concerning to us.
Well, but that's not what that says, right? It says you cannot have a hazardous liquids pipeline within 1,000 feet of, and so therefore certainly not crossing, a 69 kV or higher transmission line, right?
Thinking about it, I guess you could draw that conclusion. That was not our intent, but I hear what you're saying.
Right, and we can only figure out the intent by looking at the words that you passed, and you've gone through a series of actions to pass ordinances midstream of a project, and I hear Mr. Bakke saying, did they comply with the ordinance that you passed 2 months ago, several months after they filed their application in the first place? And you don't actually expect that Summit will come into you on April 18th and say, here's our route that now complies with the ordinance you passed yesterday, do you?
I think I would be speculating.
I'm going to object to the form of the question. That's not what I said. He had about 34 things he incorporated into the question, so perhaps he could rephrase it.
It's fine. I'll move on. On the issue of PHMSA, I want to just make sure I didn't hear it right, or that the record is going to reflect this clearly. I thought I heard your testimony, Mr. Bitner, to be that PHMSA, the agency, has told you or some representative of the county that its rules and regulations are insufficient.
No, I said I've read that.
Okay, you have read that. You are not saying that the regulator has come to you and pronounced our regulations are insufficient.
Correct.
And they haven't done that, right?
Yeah, put that in print, yeah.
PHMSA has not put that in print for itself.
So I believe they have.
Okay. Has PHMSA put a moratorium on pipeline development?
Not that I'm aware of.
In your history and growing up and living here, you're also familiar with the way hazardous liquids and natural gases have been transmitted by railroads, right?
Not overly, no.
You don't notice them?
No, I live within, I think, a mile of the railroad, but I don't really think about that.
You're aware that the number of transmission pipeline incidents in Burleigh County from the year 2000 on, incidents, fatalities, injuries, is a grand total of 1. Are you aware of that?
No.
Are you aware?
Lack of foundation.
I was asking him if he was aware of it.
Well, you're suggesting that there's some basis for that.
Is that an objection?
Yeah, it is. There's no foundation for that.
I'll note the objection. I think he's already answered the question, so we'll move forward.
You'd agree, Mr. Bitner, that transportation of goods and materials and hazardous chemicals and hazardous liquids takes place by railroad through Burleigh County, through heavily populated areas, right?
No. I don't know what goes on those railroad cars. Nobody's ever explained it to me.
It's never been important to you to look into what's traveling through areas of your county?
No.
Because you're taking a position that what's in these things matters, and if there's a release, it really matters, and at the same time, you're disregarding an industry that has far more accidents, far more releases.
Well, you're saying that. I don't know that. It's never been my concern what's that I can recall. It never occurred to me to wonder what's in those rail cars. But in all fairness, we do have a fully functional emergency management team here in Burleigh County that is well aware of those concerns and issues, so I don't have to worry about that. Thank you.
And that same team, you understand, would have an emergency response plan, a system in place in connection with the Summit pipeline under federal laws and regulations before it went into operation. You understand that, right?
How do you figure? I don't understand that.
Okay.
Because I just talked to our emergency management director, and we're unaware of that.
Okay. That would be a good thing as far as you're concerned, right? We can agree on that.
Having a safety plan from you, or having your safety plan?
Before the pipeline goes into operation in compliance with federal laws, right?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, because existing law does not appear to be sufficient to me, based on what the government has provided us. Now, if they come back in 2024 or some point in the future and say, okay, we have determined this is safe and that's not, I'm probably likely to be okay with that, because I would trust them.
Are you aware, Mr. Bitner, as part of the 2045 plan, the ETA is projected by the city to have 50-plus years worth of growth area to be taken up?
No.
Are you aware of the amount of available land between currently developed portions of Bismarck and the ETA boundaries on the northeast? Are you aware of the amount of land that could be developed out there?
Not to any specific amount of acres, no. I just know it's a lot of land, yeah.
You're aware that residents of Burleigh County have signed easements for the pipeline, right?
Yes.
And so earlier when you said that in Burleigh County, I'll paraphrase it because I won't get the language exactly right, but I think you said there's a common mind. There's 100% agreement against this pipeline.
No, I said that people that have contacted me,
right, the ones
have been 100% in opposition. Yeah.
The ones
Didn't say
that
anything about easements.
the ones that you have talked to, right?
Right.
So you're not representing anything about the way the ones that you haven't talked to view the pipeline, right?
How would I?
You've not talked with anyone.
Why would I speculate about somebody that didn't talk to me, sir? You know, the folks that signed easements. Look, I have friends and family members that have signed easements. This is not about easements.
So the people that you're talking about, and no, that's all right. I don't have anything else. Thanks, Mr. Bitner.
Sir Pelham, any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Sir, you mentioned the Emergency Services Director. The company submitted some documentation yesterday indicating that it's contacted all the emergency service directors in counties affected by the proposed line. Do you know whether or not Burleigh County Emergency Services Director has been contacted by Summit?
Yes.
And what do you know about that?
I do know. I could show you the email, and it goes way back. I just looked at it.
I don't need to see that. I'm just wondering what it is that was
one
discussed. Yeah.
Contact in, I think, July. It was June or July of last year, where the meeting had to do with a request or a comment from them that led to a request where our emergency manager contacted the rural fire to see what kind of equipment that they might need, and that was the extent of it.
So any discussion as to potential training, response plans, anything like that that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
As to the April 2023 ordinance, which is Exhibit W186, I'm wondering, sir, what involvement that you would have had in the drafting of the ordinance?
I would have had general oversight and general directional authority on it, and I directed that the planning director create an ordinance.
So I'm wondering then generally if you know Section 6, which is the minimum separation distances for the hazardous liquid pipeline R, and then it lists 1 through 8. Do you know how those distances were determined? Mm-hmm. And can you explain that to me? Sure.
It started out with basically It started out with a conversation between myself and Mitch concerning what appears to be an appropriate placeholder number based on information that we've gotten, from example, the Satarsha, Mississippi incident and things like that. And we kind of extrapolated a little bit, and we go, well, let's start with these numbers based on what we know, and we'll move forward to a public hearing and see what the public thinks.
So when you say Mitch Flanagan,
Yeah,
right,
planning director, yes.
planning director, and so anyone else, any discussion as to the distances, as to determining what they would be?
I'm not sure how many people might have had input on that. I'm certain, like, for example, we contacted Capital Electric for a distance setback from transmission facilities. And so I'm sure contacted others, but that would be a question for the planning director.
Fair enough. And do you know if this ordinance was crafted originally, or is it based upon another jurisdictions? I'm just curious as to where this came from generally, if you know.
Yeah, I do know. The general outline started out with some input from Shelby County, Iowa. I don't know how much of their outline survived, though, but that was the first that I recall hearing about.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other questions for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordy, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Sir, do you understand that PHMSA regulations in terms of emergency response only apply to the minimum standards the operator must follow, and that PHMSA has no jurisdiction or oversight, nor can it tell a county that it can't also have its own emergency response plan?
I'm not aware of that, but thanks.
Yeah, well, I just was getting real confusing, I thought, with the questions you were being asked.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah. Okay, so you understand that your county is fully 100% in its right to develop its own emergency response plans?
Well, I believe that, yes.
Yes, okay. Now, the property tax, were you saying that that's the property tax Summit claims as a benefit of its pipeline is actually being subsidized by the North Dakota citizens, taxpayers, for 10 years?
That's my understanding, yes.
And is it your understanding that the tax credits, the 45Q tax credits of $1.53 billion per year to Summit's profit is being subsidized by all of the taxpayers of the U.S.?
I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to take your word for it because that's
probably
true.
And then now they want to locate a proposed hazardous pipeline and then have the local emergency responders, first responders, subsidize their pipeline in case of an explosion and put that burden on the taxpayers, right?
That's the way it sounds.
Now, in the March 6th ordinance, it's entitled A Burleigh County Ordinance for Safety Regulations When Transporting Hazardous Liquid Through a Hazardous Pipeline. And I just want to be clear, are you aware that Summit is suing multiple counties in multiple states on the basis of the argument that anything having to do with safety is somehow preempted by the federal government? Are you familiar with that?
I am.
And to be clear, nothing in your March 6 ordinance that may have the word safety in the title goes to any restrictions or regulations or criteria of thickness of pipe, number of wells, anything to construction standards.
Absolutely not. We were very clear. We tried to thread a fine needle with that, so we didn't get into that turf.
And is it true that one of the important considerations of the Burleigh County Commission when authoring the setbacks that you have decided upon was the concept of intelligent land use and looking forward to the orderly development of the land and protecting that natural process?
I'd agree with that, yes.
All right. And you understand you're well within your rights as a county to regulate land use via setbacks?
Certainly believe that, yes.
Is it your job, do you believe, to write ordinances that accommodate a private for-profit corporation or to best serve the needs of the people in this community?
My job is to represent the citizens of Burleigh County, and a lot of times that includes Burleigh County businesses, but it's kind of easy for me because this isn't a Burleigh County company and it's not a North Dakota company, so I'm doing my best to represent Burleigh County and its citizens.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Commissioner Chrisman?
In your years as county commissioner, are you an active participant in North Dakota Association of Counties?
I wouldn't say active, no.
I
just don't have time.
So then I'm just going to guess at your answer, but I'll ask you the question anyway. Over these last couple years that this topic has come up of a CO2 pipeline, have you ever talked to any of probably the commissioners from probably 6 or 8 counties that host CO2 pipelines to see if they view the pipeline as problematic or beneficial to their taxpayers?
No, but I could elaborate a little bit. I think that in respect to Burleigh County and North Dakota businesses that generate carbon, and if our goal is to do something with it, which I don't know that that's an appropriate goal or not, that's not the point, but with the instance of the carbon dioxide pipeline coming out of the basin, Great Plains plant, I don't have a problem with that because we're doing a benefit for North Dakota businesses. I personally have interest in mineral rights and land in Mercer County, and we own mineral rights and pore space and surface on the same lands. And I would like to see North Dakota continue to develop oil, coal, and gas. Obviously, it's a benefit for the citizens of North Dakota. So if this particular pipeline was dealing with our own company's problem, or not problem, but their carbon, I would probably have a little bit more of a view. I know it would be a smaller pipeline, so it would be a lot easier. The decision would be easier because it wouldn't be nearly as dangerous.
And in your role here on the Planning Commission part, I think you said you'd been doing that for a few years.
Yes.
I wish my memory were more precise, but I think in 2017, maybe 15 or 19, do you recall, well, first of all, let me ask, in that role, do you watch legislation that might impact zoning and those types of issues?
Somewhat.
Do you have any recollection of legislation maybe 6 years ago about that changed or would have proposed to change how we base our decisions and dealing with local ordinances on transmission lines versus generation facilities?
No, sir, I don't recall that.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Haugen-Hoffert?
Yes, I have a question or two. Mr. Bitner, in your testimony, you talked about PHMSA, and I'm going to paraphrase this, so if I get it wrong, I apologize, that you kind of disregard that based on some of their CO2 regulations based on something you've read, correct?
I don't disregard. No, I didn't disregard. I'm not quite sure I follow.
Now, I'm going to have you turn to W147, because this has come up. And maybe where you're looking at your ordinance.
Okay.
And I'm going to have you read that first paragraph and see if that's what you have read and why you're looking at local Burleigh County ordinance.
Okay. Which paragraph are you?
First one.
You want me to read it out loud, or?
You can.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not that great at reading out loud.
You can read it out loud so
Okay.
they hear it.
The U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, today announced it is taking steps to implement new measures to strengthen its safety oversight of carbon dioxide, CO2 pipelines around the country and protect communities from dangerous pipeline failures. The new measures, as well as an enforcement action taken today, are a result of PHMSA's investigation into a CO2 pipeline failure in Satartia, Mississippi in 2020 that resulted in local evacuations and caused almost 50 people to seek medical attention.
So have you read that before?
Yes.
And is
This is what I was referring to, Commissioner, when I said I've information presented by the government. This is what I was referring to.
and that's what I was going to get to, is what you've read
Yes.
and why you pursued this.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Dawson, any questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Bakke, do you have any redirect?
Just briefly,
I'll just note that it's almost 5:30 and I'm starting to have time concerns just before you
I'll be
start.
brief.
So
There was quite a bit of cross-examination. In relation to this discussion with Mr. Malmberg about rail cars and if something happens in terms of if there's oil or gas in there, did you hear about the incident in Palestine, Ohio, where some rail cars with chemicals essentially caused the evacuation of the town and some serious effects to the citizens?
Yes.
I mean, is it important to compare apples to apples? In other words, if you have grain spill out of a grain car, or perhaps coal, or perhaps something else, could be far different than a leak in a CO2 pipeline that can cover miles, where people could have serious health effects or even die.
That sounds a fair statement. Yeah.
And Mr. Malmberg asked about easements. Were there people, citizens from Burleigh County, who came to you and indicated that there were threats of eminent domain by Summit?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Too many. That really offends me as a county commissioner, that somebody would come into the county and attempt to do something that would threaten and intimidate my citizens. I take that personal.
You responded to a question in regards to carbon dioxide CO2 pipelines in western North Dakota, and you gave the example of the Great Plains Synfuel plants, and you talked about a smaller pipeline might be okay if it's used for enhanced oil recovery or something like that. You're not suggesting by that comment that this pipeline, any CO2 pipeline, would be appropriate in the location that Summit is proposing in Burleigh County, are you?
Oh, no. No, I was not trying to make that.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
Mr. Malmberg, any other questions?
Yeah, sorry. I have two follow-up issues. On the issue of rail transportation, you're aware, right, that hazardous chemicals are shipped by rail through Burleigh County, anhydrous ammonia, other chemicals, right?
No, I'm not aware of that. I can just make that assumption.
Right. So
I'm not personally aware of it. Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to step over you. Right. So you're not aware, and so the questions when you're talking to be compared apples to apples, and the suggestion is that rail cars in Bismarck and Burleigh County only move grain and coal. You have no idea. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know what they move.
You've never seen the tankers.
Say again.
Never seen the tanker cars.
I have not. No.
Then the other one, there was a question about the genesis of the setback provisions in your April 17th ordinance, and I think you said it was from Shelby County, Iowa. Was your template or your starting spot?
We see what we do when we start to develop a new ordinance, and I think our planning director could speak to that, and I would think he should, is we gather information from as many sources as possible. They were one. I don't know how many others we might have had, but we try to do due diligence here.
And that's helpful, and the reference to Shelby County, Iowa is helpful because we can look at their ordinance and it looks very close in terms of setbacks, with some exceptions. They took, do you know that their setback was at 2 miles from the city limits?
No, I don't know.
Your Honor, excuse me. I didn't ask any questions about Shelby, Ohio, or in terms of the ordinance on my redirect. His examination has to be limited to my redirect.
Join.
Anything about that?
Well, normally with these type of hearings, if there's topics that are asked by the commissioners or PSC council, I allow follow-up questions on that, and it was brought up by Mr. Pelham. So I'll allow the question.
So the question, Mr. Bitner, is what analysis took place to have the county go from a template that said not less than 2 miles from a city limit to not less than 10 miles from an extraterritorial jurisdiction?
Excuse me, I'm going to object for lack of foundation. Can you show him the Shelby, Iowa?
Are you
I don't. You know what? I don't have to see the Shelby County, Iowa. I can tell you that the 10 miles was based on public input. That was a change. Originally, I suggested, I think, something on the fashion of like 4 miles from the extraterritorial line, but the public requested that distance at one of the early meetings. So they were real clear that they wanted it further.
Got it. So these just incorporate the feedback that you took at your meetings, not necessarily based on a further study of the science or things like that. It was the sentiment that led to these numbers.
No. The sentiment that led to that one number, yeah.
Okay, and the others, I guess. I mean, each of these 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They go from city limits, they go from certain types of structures, certain areas, and they take the Shelby County, Iowa example, and they multiply them by 8 times or 10 times further distances that you landed on in your ordinance than what Shelby.
Yeah, what's your point, sir?
I'm trying to understand.
I don't know if I can
If you
help
have
you
the
understand.
information to explain how you went and made a 10 times change off the template, or if it was public sentiment, it's a fine answer.
Right. It was
Relevance.
Public input.
Excuse me, I'm going to object for lack of foundation. You won't even show them what they did in Shelby, Iowa. We don't know the population. We don't have any of the foundation. Now he's saying it's 10 times.
Well, and I'm going to object to relevance on this whole line of questioning. It's not the ordinance is what it is. It's not relevant. These questions.
Perhaps I think I know what you're trying to ask. Perhaps you could rephrase your question. I mean, I think you ended with, can you provide an explanation of background for the changes?
Of why the difference, and if the answer is public sentiment, I can stop there and I won't ask any others.
Yeah, it was. These meetings were super well attended. People got themselves educated in a hurry on this thing, and they came to us demanding ordinances, and they demanded these protections, and that's where we ended up based on those hearings.
Got it.
It was not nobody's grabbing numbers here. This was based on some pretty seriously educated research. There are educated people in Burleigh County, you understand.
Did you look at that research yourself, or was it the feedback from the persons who were providing that information to you?
Both.
Okay.
All the above. Because when we develop ordinances, we develop them to what does the public agree to. These are the things that we all live by here. And what did we all agree to? That's what's in front of us. And it was 100% unanimous, except for Summit folks that were at the meeting.
Thanks. I was just trying to understand it. Thank you.
Mr. Pelham, any other questions?
No other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Jordy?
Yes. Are you aware of any conflict with state or federal law in your ordinance based on it being modeled after Shelby County, Iowa, which was vetted by their county attorney, and then you having your additional legal input?
No, I'm not aware of any
And do you believe that your ordinance is unreasonably restrictive in any way?
No.
All right, thank you. Nothing further.
Any other commissioner questions? All right, that's it, Mr. Bitner.
Well, I feel like
Short and sweet, right?
Thank you, Commissioners.